On April 12, 1990, a man diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia made a chilling prediction. He claimed that in 1997, 5 billion people would die from a deadly virus. The few who survived would abandon the surface of the earth and live underground, and the planet would be handed back to the animals. By 1996, that pandemic had already started. A mysterious virus swept across the globe and wiped out almost the entire human population. Rumor had it that a secretive group calling themselves the Army of the 12 Monkeys was behind it, and just like the man had warned, the outbreak was so bad that humanity was forced to retreat below ground to survive. Among those survivors is a prisoner named James Cole, locked in an underground prison in Philadelphia in the year 2035. Every night, James slips into the same dream from his childhood. A man in white trousers is gunned down in an airport, and a woman kneels beside him, crying. It is a memory that refuses to leave him, and he has no idea yet why it matters so much. One morning, James is picked to go up to the surface and collect biological samples. According to the guards, no prisoner has ever come back from that job alive, and the rare few who did came back with their minds broken. His neighbor in the next cell, a man named Jose, does not believe a word of it. 39 years have passed since the pandemic began, and the surface has been reclaimed by wild animals. James suits up in heavy protective gear with an oxygen tank, almost like an astronaut. Even the smallest tear in that suit means he will not be allowed back underground. Up top, he finds a frozen, silent Philadelphia buried in snow. He scoops up a cockroach. A bear roars nearby but wanders off. He pushes into an old shopping mall, collects a cluster of spiders, and then spots something on the wall. The symbol of the 12 monkeys, spray painted in red, with the words, "We did it," underneath. A tiger roars through the building, and James runs back down underground. He has just found his first clue. Back below, he is hosed down and tested for contamination, then brought in front of a group of scientists, one of them a woman named Jones. James is serving time for a long list of crimes, so they offer him a deal. They want to send him back to 1996 to find the source of the virus and stop the pandemic before it starts, and in exchange, his sentence gets cut. The film then jumps to April of 1990 in Baltimore. A psychiatrist named Catherine Rayleigh is called in to examine a man with no identity who was just dragged off the streets. He has no drugs in his system, and yet he keeps screaming about a virus. That man is James Cole. What unsettles Catherine is the strange feeling that she has met him somewhere before. James is convinced it is October of 1996, so Catherine has to explain that it is actually April of 1990. And there is the first problem. James really did travel through time. The scientists just sent him to the wrong year. Catherine diagnoses him as mentally unstable, and the police move him to a psychiatric hospital. There he is introduced to another patient, a man named Jeffrey Goins, who rambles nonstop in a stream of nonsense. Later, James tries to convince the doctors he is sane. He lays out everything: the 12 monkeys, the pandemic that will kill 5 billion people, and his mission to trace the origin of the virus. Every doctor in the room quietly decides he is out of his mind. James says he needs to call the scientists in 2035 and leave a message telling them they sent him to the wrong year. They let him use the phone. The number connects him to a random woman busy taking care of her kids. The scientists will not be using that number until 1996, and in 1990 it still belongs to her. Now the doctors are certain James has paranoid schizophrenia, the exact condition described at the start of the film. But Catherine still cannot shake the feeling that she knows him. Meanwhile, James's childhood memory keeps getting sharper. And now the woman crying over the man in white trousers turns out to be Catherine herself. That night, James starts planning an escape, but the security is tight, with barred windows and a heavy iron door. Jeffrey overhears and immediately wants in, then makes so much noise that the staff drag him out. On his way out, he brags that he could leave the hospital anytime he wants. All he has to do is call his father, Leland. The next morning, James watches a television report about animal testing. It hits him hard, and he says out loud that maybe humanity is nothing but cruelty, and maybe the human race deserves to be wiped off the earth. Jeffrey hears that, and something clicks in his head. Soon after, a guard sedates James until he is barely conscious. Then Jeffrey appears with a set of stolen keys and whips the other patients into chaos. The guards come running, and Jeffrey tells James to run for the iron door. He nearly makes it, but the guards catch him on the second floor. James is sedated again and locked in an empty room, strapped to a bed. Meanwhile, the other doctors question Catherine for going too easy on James. She admits she is convinced she has met him before, though she cannot say where or when. Then a guard reports that James has vanished from the isolation room without a trace, even though he was sedated, strapped down, and locked in. The film returns to James's childhood memory one more time, now crystal clear, and this time Jeffrey is standing in it too. James wakes up back in 2035. He tells the scientists they sent him to 1990 instead of 1996. In response, they show him a series of photos: the red 12 monkey symbol, a bearded man in a red tie, a giant stone head statue. In a crowd of people at a protest with Jeffrey standing right in the middle of it, the scientists offer James another shot at the mission, and this time he agrees. But instead of landing in 1996, James is dumped into the middle of the First World War in France in 1917. And lying there badly wounded is Jose, his cellmate from the beginning of the film. Jose was given the exact same mission. He just arrived earlier. Seconds later, James takes a bullet to the leg and he is yanked through time again. Now it is November of 1996 in Baltimore. Catherine is giving a lecture about her new book, The Doomsday Syndrome. The book explores what she calls the Cassandra complex, a condition where a person warns everyone about a future disaster and is never believed. As her main example, she describes a soldier from 1917 who claimed to come from the future, said he was on a mission to find a disease and stop a pandemic that would devastate humanity in 1996, and then vanished without a trace. That soldier, of course, is Jose, and the photo in her presentation matches him perfectly. After the lecture, a man named Dr. Peters comes up for an autograph and tells her that humanity has become a species that destroys the environment and strips the earth of its resources without a thought for the future. Catherine barely listens. Then she gets to her car, and James is already sitting in the passenger seat. He takes her hostage. He forces her to drive him to Philadelphia, the city that will become the base of the 12 Monkeys. He admits he cannot drive himself, since he has lived underground since he was a boy. Catherine is terrified because the schizophrenic patient who vanished 6 years ago is suddenly sitting right next to her. Along the way, he makes her stop at a hotel to rest and ties her up so she cannot run. He tells her she has appeared in his dreams for years, though her hair was a different color. Back at her hospital, the staff report her disappearance to the police, and a manhunt begins. On the road, James explains how the pandemic starts. People catch what looks like an ordinary fever, and it spreads until it kills 5 billion people worldwide. When they reach Philadelphia, James is stunned to find the 12 monkey symbol spray painted across a wall. Catherine still does not believe him and brushes it off as random graffiti. James follows the trail of symbols, dragging Catherine along into an abandoned building crawling with homeless people, where 2 of them attack.
We shouldn't be here!
He fights them off and keeps tracing the markings until they reach a building with a giant stone head out front, exactly like the one in the photo the scientist showed him. James storms inside with a gun and finds the headquarters of the FAA, an animal rights group. They claim they know nothing about the 12 monkeys, but once the gun comes out, they get nervous and they let one name slip: Jeffrey.
I told you guys that fuckhead Goins would get us into something
Shut up!
like this.
Jeffrey Goins?
The moment James and Catherine hear that name, they freeze and demand to know everything. One of the members explains that after Jeffrey was released from the mental hospital, he became a media sensation, mostly because he turned against his own father. Leland Goins is a Nobel Prize-winning virologist who constantly uses animals in his experiments. Jeffrey, who is obsessed with animals and nature, felt the FAA was not doing nearly enough to protect endangered species or stop industrial damage to the planet. So he took matters into his own hands. He released 100 snakes into a session of the American Senate, then built an underground organization called the 12 Monkeys. That group has been hunting down lawyers and bankers on Wall Street with stun weapons, nets, and bear traps. Jeffrey has also publicly attacked his father's man-made virus research on television. Before leaving, James grabs a notebook off the desk and takes one of the FAA's cars, since Catherine's car is now being hunted by police. She still refuses to believe the world is about to end, mostly because both Jeffrey and James are former mental patients. Then she notices the bullet wound in his thigh, digs the bullet out, and bandages his leg. She does not believe him for a second when he says he was shot on a battlefield in the First World War. Then James locks Catherine in the trunk of the car. He drives to the address in the notebook, leaves the car in the woods, and slips into a Goins family party packed with important officials, including Leland and Jeffrey. He claims to be an old friend of Jeffrey's, and after 6 years, the two finally come face to face again. James demands access to the pure virus so he can carry it to the future. Jeffrey admits he does have a grand plan to shake the world. And here's the sting. The idea came from a conversation the two of them had in the mental hospital 6 years ago. James is furious, convinced Jeffrey and the 12 monkeys are about to wipe out humanity with a virus stolen from his father. But this is the real twist. Everything James said back in 1990 was just angry venting. It meant nothing. Jeffrey took every word seriously, partly because he is not sane, and partly because he genuinely hates what humans are doing to the planet. James tries to attack him. The guards move in and he runs. He gets back to the car and lets Catherine out of the trunk, and she explodes at him after nearly suffocating in there.
Died in there, you son of a bitch!
James barely reacts. He is drowning in guilt. If the pandemic really started with his own careless words, then 5 billion deaths are on him too. The party guards have already called the police, who are now sweeping the woods. Catherine leans on the car horn so they will come rescue her and arrest James. But once again, James vanishes into thin air. He is back in 2035, and the information he brought in earns him a full pardon. But he does not feel relieved. He is convinced the pandemic started from his own idea, and the guilt gets so bad that he starts believing he really is insane, and that the entire world of 2035 is a hallucination. When he comes to after being sedated, he decides he is going back to 1996 to stop Jeffrey and the 12 monkeys himself. Back in 1996, Catherine gets a call from a forensics officer that stops her cold. The bullet she pulled out of James's thigh is an antique round, fired sometime around the 1920s. She immediately goes back to her research on the soldier from 1917 in France, the man who claimed to come from the future. And in the old photo of Jose and his unit, she spots a face she knows, James, looking exactly the same in 1917 as he does in 1996. She finally believes him. Catherine calls Leland Goins at his laboratory and asks about Jeffrey's involvement with the virus research. Leland insists his son has nothing to do with it and has never touched his lab. But during that same call, we learn that Dr. Peters is Leland's assistant. Catherine drives to the FAA headquarters in Philadelphia and pounds on the door. Nobody answers, so she grabs a can of spray paint lying nearby and writes a message across the wall, asking if the virus is inside and if 5 billion people are going to die. Right then, James appears and calls out to her. But he is lost and confused now because he has convinced himself he really is a paranoid schizophrenic and that everything about the 12 monkeys was a hallucination. He is so hopeless that he starts walking straight toward the police, ready to be arrested. Catherine pulls him back, and that is when James's eyes go wide. He is staring at the message she just spray painted on the wall. It is word for word the same graffiti the scientists showed him back in 2035. Meanwhile, inside the FAA building, Jeffrey is gathered with his team, putting the finishing touches on his world-shaking plan. They slip away from the police and hide out in a hotel, but James still insists the virus is a delusion. Even after Catherine shows him the photo from 1917, he calls it a dream. Then, a thug jumps them, and James beats the man to death. They take his money and run.
Yeah, you just sit tight.
Now James confesses the real reason he came back. It was never only about stopping the pandemic. He just wants to stop being haunted by the future and live out his life in peace with Catherine. The two of them feel bound together by something they cannot explain. To make sure the scientists can never pull him back, James rips out 2 of his own teeth, the ones they have been using to track him. Catherine takes him to a mall for new clothes, a wig, and a fake mustache, and they put on their disguises in the back of a movie theater. James starts to wonder if the pandemic will simply never happen. Maybe this is a parallel world. In his timeline, the virus wiped out humanity. But maybe now that he has come back and met Catherine, the outbreak never comes, and the two of them just get written off as crazy people. Once the disguises are on, James is stunned by how Catherine looks. She is exactly the woman from his dreams. She books 2 tickets to the Florida Keys, leaving the next day. Elsewhere, Jeffrey and his crew kidnap Leland from his laboratory. But Leland has already stripped his own access from the lab system, making sure his son cannot get his hands on the virus, especially after Catherine's phone call. When Jeffrey hears this, he and his crew just laugh, because their world-shaking plan was never about a virus at all. The 12 monkeys only wanted to release every animal from the Philadelphia Zoo and lock Leland inside one of the cages as a protest against what scientists do to animals. Watching zoo animals wander through the city streets and hearing the radio report about Jeffrey, James, and Catherine burst out laughing. The 12 monkeys are nothing but a group of unhinged pranksters. That "we did it" graffiti from the very beginning of the film simply meant they succeeded in freeing the animals. But when they finally reach the airport, James goes cold. The scene around him and the way the two of them look matches his childhood dream perfectly, down to the last detail, which can only mean one thing. The virus is still going to spread, no matter who is behind it. Catherine tries to calm him down. Meanwhile, the police are already spread across the airport, since both of them are on the wanted list, so they split up. Catherine goes to pay for the tickets, and James goes to the restroom to fix his fake mustache. They agree to meet at the newsstand. Before that, James makes one last call to the scientist number in 2035. He tells them the 12 monkeys are not the masterminds behind the pandemic, that he is done with the investigation, and that he is not coming back. In the restroom, James runs into Jose, sent from 2035 in response to that call. The scientists want James to hunt down whoever is truly behind the pandemic, and Jose has orders to kill Catherine if he refuses. James has no idea who spreads the virus and only wants to live in peace in Florida, but to keep Catherine alive, he takes the pistol Jose hands him. At the same time, a young boy is standing in that airport with his mother. It is James as a child. Waiting at the newsstand, Catherine reads that Jeffrey and the 12 monkeys have all been arrested. Then she stops on a photo of Dr. Peters, Leland's assistant. And at that exact moment, she crosses paths with Peters himself, carrying a suitcase on his way to fly around the world. It hits her instantly. The one spreading the virus was never the 12 monkeys. It is Peters, the environmentalist who told her at her own book signing that humanity was destroying the planet. They have been chasing the wrong people the entire time, and the only way to stop the pandemic is to kill Dr. Peters. Catherine races to find James and tells him everything, and in that moment, James finally understands his dream. The man in the yellow jacket he always assumed was Jeffrey was actually Peters. Peters' suitcase goes through the airport check, and the truth is confirmed. Inside are vials of the virus, but the officers wave him through because he carries a permit claiming they are ordinary biological samples. The permit is forged. Desperate to cut ahead and stop him, Catherine and James argue with the airport staff. The police spot them and move in. James panics, strikes an officer, and charges through the security gate with the gun to shoot Peters. And a young boy watches the whole thing from a distance, right up until the moment the adult James is shot dead by police. James dies exactly the way he always saw it in his dreams, gunned down as a threat, with Catherine kneeling beside him and crying. He had been watching his own death since he was a child. It is a loop, the same chronology repeating over and over. That boy will grow up to live the same life, come back to the same airport, and die in the same way, again and again. As for Peters, who slipped away from the shooting unharmed, he boarded the plane and prepared to travel across the globe, spreading the virus wherever he went. And in the film's final moment, Peters sits down right beside Jones, one of the very scientists who would send James on his mission in 2035. But without her realizing it, the man seated beside her is the true architect of humanity's destruction. So the moral of the story is never tell your crazy roommate your random shower thoughts because he might turn them into a global business plan.